I never really planned to put my life on hold. It just happened. One moment, I was dreaming about grad school, traveling, building something of my own. The next, I was moving back into the old house with creaky floors and floral curtains, taking care of the woman who once carried me through my worst nights. Grandma needed me, and somehow, everything else just fell away, like it didn't even matter anymore. Day after day, it was the same rhythm. I'd wake up before the sun, fix her breakfast just the way she liked it, oatmeal with cinnamon and a splash of milk, and sit with her while the morning news droned in the background, bathing her, brushing her hair, helping her into her favorite worn-out chair by the window. It was work that chipped away at you quietly, not all at once, but in a way you could feel deep in your bones. Meanwhile, Elliot would call every few months, usually around a holiday when it felt too guilty not to. His voice always filled with big stories about promotions, new cities, important people he was meeting. He loved reminding me, and himself, how grateful he was that I had things handled back home. Handled. Like Grandma was a task to check off a list instead of the woman who built our family from scratch. But the truth is, I never kept score. I didn't need medals or mentions. I believed, deep down, that love counted for something. That devotion didn't need to be loud to be seen. I gave my heart without expecting anything in return, trusting that some things, the right things, didn't need witnesses to be real. And maybe that's why what came next hit me like a blow I never saw coming. Some nights, when Grandma couldn't sleep, I'd sit by her bedside and listen to her stories, the ones she only ever shared in whispers. Tales about how she built her life from scratch after losing everything twice over, how she once sewed her own wedding dress because she couldn't afford a new one. Those moments felt like sacred treasures, little pieces of her spirit she handed only to me. I held onto them tighter than anything money could ever buy. There were times when I'd feel the weight of it all pressing down so hard, I wondered if anyone even noticed. The missed parties, the friends who stopped inviting me out, the steady fading of a life I thought I was supposed to have. I'd scroll through Elliot's social media late at night, seeing him at galas, beaches, corporate retreats, and I'd wonder if he ever thought about the life I gave up, or if he even knew what Grandma's favorite song was anymore. Still, every time doubt crept in, Grandma's smile would anchor me. She didn't have much strength left, but when she squeezed my hand, it felt like a whole world of thank yous bundled into one little gesture. And that was enough. It had to be enough. I told myself that real loyalty wasn't something you shouted from rooftops. It was something you lived, breath by breath, choice by choice, even when no one was clapping. Looking back, I realize now how easy it is to believe love will shield you from disappointment. That being good, being loyal, will somehow protect you from betrayal. I clung to that belief like a lifeline, never once suspecting that loyalty, in the wrong hands, can be turned into the very knife that cuts you the deepest. The last spring we had together, Grandma grew weaker. I started writing little notes and tucking them into her dresser drawers, just so she'd find them when I wasn't around. Reminders that she was loved, that she mattered. I didn't know it at the time, but I think a part of me was already preparing for goodbye. There was a softness to those final months, a quiet rhythm, like the closing notes of a song you didn't want to end. Meanwhile, Elliot's appearances stayed as rare as a blue moon. He'd breeze in, kiss Grandma on the forehead, and act like he'd just stepped off the cover of some magazine. She'd light up whenever he entered the room, and I used to tell myself that was okay, that maybe she needed to believe he was still the golden boy she remembered. Maybe we both did. It was easier than admitting how little space we actually occupied in his world. I spent so many nights sitting by that window, the one Grandma loved, watching the seasons change and wondering where I fit into all of it. But every time my doubts grew too loud, I'd look over at her, fragile, smiling, clutching my hand, and the answer felt simple again. She needed me. And loving her, truly loving her, meant staying, no matter how small the world got. In my heart, I believed that when the time came, everything would somehow fall into place, that the years of sacrifice, of love given freely and fiercely, would matter. That the woman who raised me would make sure I was remembered, not just in spirit, but in the life she left behind. The day Grandma passed, the house felt colder, heavier, like even the walls knew something precious had slipped away. I moved through the motions, arranging flowers, answering calls, thanking people for their sympathy, though half the time I couldn't even hear what they were saying. I kept thinking about how she used to hum while she cooked, how the air smelled of cinnamon and old books. Everywhere I looked, there were pieces of her, stitched into every corner of the life we'd shared. A week later, we gathered in the living room, the same place where Grandma used to decorate the tree every Christmas, to talk about the estate. I sat there, heart pounding, expecting. I don't even know what. Closure, maybe. Some acknowledgement of everything we'd been through together. Elliot was there too, impeccably dressed, scrolling through his phone like he had better places to be. And my mother, sharp-eyed and brisk, carrying a folder that looked way too thin to hold a lifetime. That's when she said it. Just like that, like she was reading off a grocery list. "There's no official will," she announced. Her voice didn't waver. "So, we've decided. The house, the savings, the valuables, they'll go to Elliot. He's more promising. He'll know what to do with it." I remember blinking at her, trying to make sense of the words, like maybe if I replayed them in my head enough times they would mean something else. For a second, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I wanted to speak, to shout, to remind them of everything, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every whispered story by Grandma's bedside. But nothing came out. I just sat there, invisible, while they handed my life over like it was a business transaction. And somehow, the betrayal wasn't in their words. It was in how easy it was for them to say them. I remember staring at my mother, hoping, begging, for even a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Something that would tell me this wasn't as cold-blooded as it sounded. But all I saw was justification, calculations, that kind of sterile logic people use when they want to scrub emotion out of betrayal. "You'll understand one day," she said, almost condescending. "Family investments must be strategic." Like I was some sentimental liability, not a daughter who had given everything. Elliot didn't even pretend to protest. Of course he didn't. He nodded, as if this made perfect sense, then offered me one of those tight-lipped smiles that says, "Don't make this awkward." I hated how natural it looked on his face, how comfortable he was stepping into a future built on someone else's back. There wasn't a single pause, not a single mention of fairness, not even a thank you. I went home that night and sat in Grandma's old chair, still draped in her favorite shawl. I held a teacup she used every morning and just stared at the steam rising until it disappeared into the air. I thought about all the times she told me I was her anchor, her reason to smile, about the handwritten notes she used to leave me on the fridge, and I wondered, had she really left nothing? Not a word, not a will, not even a letter? It was easy, I suppose, for them to believe I'd accept it. That I'd stay silent, like I always had. After all, I wasn't the one who made speeches or grand entrances. I was the quiet one, the caregiver, the good daughter who never asked for much. But they forgot something important. I may have been quiet, but I had been watching, learning. And when people mistake silence for weakness, they often forget it's the quiet ones who see everything. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing her voice, soft, trembling, calling me her heart. I wanted to believe this was just some mistake, some cruel misunderstanding that would sort itself out with time. But deep down, something didn't sit right. Grandma wasn't careless. She wouldn't have left something so important undone. And the more I thought about it, the more I began to question everything I had taken at face value. I started replaying conversations in my mind, scanning my memories like they were evidence files. I remembered Grandma once mentioning a drawer she didn't want anyone touching. I remembered the night she cried in the hallway after a fight with my mother, a fight she tried to brush off as nothing. And then there were the missing letters, the ones she always used to write but suddenly stopped, almost like someone had told her to. They had rewritten the story right in front of me, turned devotion into irrelevance, love into an inconvenience. And in that moment, something hardened in me. I wasn't angry yet, not quite, but something colder, sharper, had begun to take root. This wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about being erased. About a life of service being treated like an afterthought. That was the wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. And even though I sat alone in that dark room, I wasn't broken. Not anymore. Something had shifted. I realized I didn't need their approval. What I needed was the truth. And I was finally ready to go looking for it, no matter where it led or what I uncovered. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even shed a tear in front of them. I just nodded, left the room, and closed the door behind me. Let them think I had accepted it, that I was too naive or too broken to fight back. But inside, something had clicked into place. Not rage, not grief, but clarity. If they wanted to treat me like I was invisible, I'd use that invisibility to my advantage. The first thing I did was pull out my notebooks, the ones I'd used to keep track of Grandma's medications, appointments, and household expenses. But they held more than just routines. They held proof. Notes about money I'd spent on repairs, receipts for groceries, screenshots of bank transfers. Things I never thought I'd need, but had kept out of habit. Or maybe hope. Now, they were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I'd be forced to solve. Then there were the letters. I found them tucked in an old recipe book, yellowed with time but still carrying her handwriting, loops and curls I could recognize in my sleep. "You're the best part of me," one read. "If anything ever happens, I want you to know how proud I am of you." I stared at that line for hours. It felt like she was still here, whispering that I wasn't wrong to feel what I felt. But it was the absence that screamed loudest, the will. I remembered her saying she had written one. She even joked once about hiding it, where no one could burn it out of spite. But now, no one seemed to know where it was, or at least they pretended not to. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized, some things don't disappear by accident. I started gathering everything like I was building armor. Every bank statement, every handwritten card, every photo of me and Grandma, not just smiling, but living. Birthdays, hospital visits, Sunday afternoons in the garden. All the small moments no one else bothered to show up for. I wasn't just her caregiver, I was her witness. And now I needed to make sure someone else finally saw what I saw. It didn't take long for me to find a lawyer. I looked for someone who didn't flinch at quiet cases, the kind where the truth hides under layers of family loyalty and polished lies. Her name was Nadine. She listened, really listened. And when I told her everything, she didn't look at me with pity or doubt. She looked at me like I had a case, like what happened to me actually mattered. That alone was enough to breathe life back into my spine. When I mentioned the missing will, her eyes narrowed. "People don't just forget wills," she said. "They hide them, or they destroy them." That word, destroy, made my stomach turn. I thought of all the drawers in the house I never opened, all the times my mother rushed to sort things after Grandma passed. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was a trail. And I intended to follow it, even if it led to places I didn't want to see. So we brought in someone who specialized in forensics. Not the kind you see on TV, but a soft-spoken man who knew how to uncover what others bury. Old hard drives, ink analysis, timestamps on scanned documents. I watched him work in silence, my hands trembling while he lifted secrets from the dust like they were still alive. If they thought they'd buried the truth, they were about to find out how deeply I could dig. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing hour, the silence between me and my family stretched further. They had no idea what I was doing. They thought I had backed down, that I had accepted my place as the dutiful daughter who knew when to stay quiet. But what they didn't realize was that while they were gloating over their spoils, I was building a case strong enough to knock the ground out from under them. We uncovered emails, timestamps, drafts of documents Grandma had sent to a lawyer 6 months before her health declined, all pointing to a will that left everything to me. The details were unmistakable: the house, the savings, even a letter she dictated to her attorney explaining why. Because she was here. Because she stayed. Those words hit me like a wave. Not just validation, truth, written into history. But there was something else, too. A document trail showing that my mother had accessed Grandma's safe deposit box 2 days after she passed. The same box where Grandma once told me she kept everything important. No one had mentioned it. No one had asked me to be there. And now I knew why. The will didn't vanish. It was removed. Deliberately. Quietly. Like an eraser sweeping away a life's worth of intention. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the files spread in front of me, hands curled around a mug that had long gone cold. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was ready. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like I had solid ground beneath me. They thought they were the only ones holding the keys. What they didn't know was, I had been collecting locks. Filing the case was less dramatic than I thought it would be. No slamming doors, no shouting matches. Just a signature, a quiet breath, and the slow machinery of justice beginning to turn. I didn't do it for revenge, not really. I did it because the truth mattered, because Grandma's voice deserved to be heard, even if she wasn't here to speak it herself, and because I finally understood that silence only protects those who have something to hide. When the court date was announced, the atmosphere shifted. My mother stopped calling. Elliot sent one cold message. "This won't go anywhere. You're embarrassing yourself." I didn't respond. Let them believe whatever they wanted. I knew what we had found. I knew what Grandma had written. And I had no intention of letting them rewrite her legacy just because they thought no one would challenge them. The day of the hearing, I wore the necklace Grandma gave me on my 16th birthday. A simple pendant, nothing flashy, but it felt like armor. Nadine stood beside me, confident and calm, while the other side showed up with tired excuses and forced politeness. My mother barely looked at me. Elliot smirked like he still thought this was a bluff. But I wasn't bluffing. I never had been. We laid it all out. The letters, the records, the forensic evidence, the financial trail. Every document told the same story. Grandma had a will, a clear one, and someone had tried to erase it. When the judge began reading his findings, I didn't even realize I was holding my breath. But with every word, it became clearer. The truth had survived. And it was louder than their lies. The judge didn't mince words. He called it what it was: manipulation, deceit, and a deliberate attempt to defraud an intended heir. I watched my mother's face twitch just slightly when he mentioned the safe deposit box. Elliot's jaw tightened when the ruling confirmed that not only was the will valid, but their actions had directly violated probate law. The courtroom felt still, like everyone knew something irreversible had just happened. And then came the ruling. The estate, the house, the savings, the heirlooms, all legally mine. Not because I fought the hardest, but because Grandma's voice had finally been heard. The judge even made a point to acknowledge the years I'd spent caring for her. Said it was a rare case of sacrifice being overshadowed by entitlement. I don't remember smiling. I just remember the quiet warmth in my chest, like something long frozen had finally begun to thaw. When we walked out of the courtroom, Nadine turned to me and said, "That wasn't just a win, that was justice." I nodded, but inside, I wasn't celebrating. I was grieving something much deeper, the final confirmation that my family saw me not as a daughter or a sister, but as an obstacle. And that no matter how much love I gave, it had never been enough to make them see me differently. Elliot didn't speak to me. He just walked past, his pride shredded, and his inheritance gone. My mother, she looked at me like a stranger. I don't know what hurt more, the betrayal or the fact that they never even pretended to be sorry. But I didn't need an apology anymore. I had something far more powerful: the truth, and a name cleared in the eyes of the law. The headlines in the local paper were small, tucked into the corner of a Wednesday edition, but the words struck hard. Disputed will reveals family rift. People started whispering. Neighbors who once nodded politely now paused a little longer, curious. Some even reached out, not with pity, but with quiet admiration. They had seen me pushing Grandma's wheelchair down the street. They knew who had stayed when no one else did. And now, so did everyone else. I walked through the house that week like I was seeing it for the first time. The photos, the chipped kitchen tiles, the threadbare rug in the hallway. It all belonged to me now, not just legally, but emotionally. I had fought for this place not out of greed, but because it held her in every detail. This was our story, and no one had the right to erase it. Not even the ones who shared my blood. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, there was an ache I couldn't ignore. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt emptied, like the victory came at the cost of something I could never quite name. Maybe it was the last sliver of hope that they'd ever love me the way Grandma had. Maybe it was the part of me that still wanted a mother and brother who saw me, really saw me, and chose me anyway. That part? It was finally gone. But even in that emptiness, something new was forming. A sense of strength that didn't come from winning, but from surviving, from refusing to be erased. They had dismissed me as the quiet daughter, the background character in a family built on appearances. But in the end, it was the law and the truth that recognized who I really was. And I wasn't done yet. I didn't rush to make decisions. I let the dust settle, let the silence fill the cracks they'd left behind. The house, the one they fought so hard to steal, became mine without a single scream or slammed door. I spent a few weeks wandering from room to room, touching the walls Grandma once leaned against, breathing in the last traces of her perfume that still clung to the curtains. I wasn't angry anymore. I was deliberate. When the time felt right, I invited them back. Just a simple text, no drama, no long explanations. If you want to walk through the house one last time, tomorrow at noon. I didn't expect them to show up, but part of me knew they would. Pride is funny that way. They can't resist performing for a stage they think they still own. And sure enough, at noon sharp, they pulled up in their polished car, all stiff shoulders and fake smiles. I let them walk through the empty rooms without saying much. I watched as my mother ran her hand along the banister, as Elliot glanced at the cracked fireplace Grandma loved so much. It was strange, seeing them there. These people who had fought so hard to erase my place in this home, now reduced to awkward tourists in a life they never truly understood. I didn't rush them. Let them take it all in. Let them feel what loss really tasted like. When we reached the living room, the heart of everything, I pulled out a manila envelope and handed it to them. Inside was a crisp copy of the restored will, the one they had tried so hard to make disappear. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she read the opening line, the words etched forever in ink. To my granddaughter Lena, who stayed. And for once, neither of them had anything clever to say. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw accusations. I just stood there, letting the weight of the truth hang in the air between us. For the first time, they couldn't spin it, couldn't bargain it away with smooth words and hollow promises. The paper in their hands was more than a legal document. It was a mirror. A reminder of every moment they chose ambition over family, appearances over love. My mother opened her mouth once, maybe to argue, maybe to explain, but I just shook my head. There was nothing left to say. No words could rebuild the bridge they had set on fire the moment they decided my loyalty was worthless. They hadn't lost a house that day. They had lost the last person who had ever been willing to stand by them when the shine wore off. And now, they would have to live with the ashes of their own choices. Elliot tried to hold on to his pride, cracking a joke about moving on and better investments. But even his voice wavered, just a little. He looked around the empty house one last time, and I saw it, the flicker of something real. Regret, maybe. Not enough to change anything, but enough to crack that polished armor he wore so well. I almost pitied him. Almost. When they finally left, I stood alone in the living room, sunlight streaming through the dusty windows, the will still clutched in my hand. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like release. Like I had finally set down a weight I didn't even know I had been carrying. And as I locked the door behind them, I realized this wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something they would never be able to touch. A few weeks later, I sold the house. Not because I wanted to get rid of it, but because I knew it had already served its purpose. It had been the battleground, the evidence, the memory bank. But it wasn't my future. I needed to build something that looked forward, something that made meaning out of the pain. So I took a portion of the inheritance, just a slice of what they once believed I didn't deserve, and I created something Grandma would have been proud of. It's a care home now. Small, quiet, painted in soft earth tones with curtains that catch the morning light, just the way she liked them. I named it after her, Margaret's Place. It's for women who gave everything to their families and found themselves alone. Women who deserve more than silence at the end of their stories. Here, they're seen. They're loved. They're not forgotten. Every inch of that space feels like a quiet revolution. Sometimes I sit in the garden there, sipping tea the way Grandma taught me, and I imagine her sitting beside me. I think she'd laugh at the wind chimes, hum along with the old records we play in the common room. I don't think she'd care that I didn't chase big titles or flashy jobs. I think she'd just be proud that I took what was meant for erasure and turned it into something that will outlive us both. They tried to erase her name from the estate, to write me out of the story. But in the end, I gave her a legacy they couldn't touch. A legacy rooted not in property or money, but in care. resilience, and truth. And that, no matter what anyone says, is something no one can ever steal.